Hey guys, Bridget, how you doing? Hagen, how's it going? Okay, so let me tell you what I'm doing today. This is not a traditional DPL, okay? So you guys know we're not on streaming, we're not on broadcast. This is just Facebook. That's all this is, all right? So here's what we're doing. So now that DPL is on the spot, Tampa Bay 66, 5 nights a week, Greg has learned how to, he's done this. He's done DPL, it went awesome. Technically, everything was perfect, right? So Shay and Jason and Allie have yet to learn how to do this. They could certainly do the show, but there's all these buttons to press. There's the commercial breaks. There's 11 billion things that could go wrong. So until they get up to speed on that, here's my nightmare that I lay in bed and think about at night. So this show runs on a PC. Everything that we see here, I mean, and you know, back in the day when we were doing this, nobody cared because it was just on Facebook, right? And then it started ad streaming, and still nobody cared. Now all of a sudden, people care because we're on broadcast and there are sponsors and whatnot, right? So I was thinking, what happens if the computer, if we have a big thunderstorm and we lose power and the computer reboots and we're off the air? So that would not be good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to record some generic DPLs. And here's a little interesting thing that I learned. So because the name of this show is Dennis Phillips Live, we have to have on the screen, it has to say previously recorded for FCC regulations. Makes sense because you'd be telling people that it's live and it isn't, right? So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to record 3 different shows. I don't know if this is going to work with 3 different backgrounds. They're going to be real generic hurricane shows, but they also will be, no, I don't get paid overtime. None of us do. But they'll also still be Q&A related. So what I'm going to be talking about, think about this. So it can't be dated. I can't show what's happening current, obviously, because if it runs, it would look wrong. And more often than not, this is kind of an emergency backup. If, like I said, something happens, and like this Thursday, I'm going to be off. We're going to be doing our meet and greet, which I hope you guys show up. We're going to be at the Threshers game. And again, Ryan's singing the national anthem. I'm throwing out the first pitch. Then we're going to have a big old meet and greet by the third base side with just everybody just, you know, saying hi, talking and everything, right? So it'll be a lot of fun. But on that date, Shay's filling in for me, and she doesn't know how to do this yet. So we'll run a show, right? And because the show must go on, as they say, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to do you guys can be my producers, actually. So I have 2 6-minute segments and 2 5:45 segments. I need to write these down. So what I'll have to do is when I start the segment, which we're not started yet, I'm going to run an open, just like it's going to be recorded in the control room, and then they're going to bump it over to master control, and then it'll be ready. So if something happens and we have a hit, power outage, whatever, they can immediately have programming to fill, right? Or if I'm off and Greg isn't in and Shay or Jason or Allie aren't quite there to knowing which of all these buttons to press, there's a lot of them. So this button right here takes us to commercial break. So every time I go to a commercial break, which we never had to do in the past, right, with old DPL. So anytime there's a commercial break, I hit, and it says even on here, DPL. I hit it, it automatically goes to this computer over here, and it starts a 1:30 break with a countdown. So we're doing a little bit behind the scenes. Again, if you're looking for weather tonight, we're not doing current weather. Because, well, I mean, I'll tell you to you right now, but that's not what this show is. Because again, as I'm saying, this is, I think it's called an evergreen, is what my boss was calling it. It's one that will stay usable all year round, just in case. But obviously, hurricane season won't be around once we hit November, hopefully. So, you know, I might do some different ones. So that's kind of what we're doing. So I'm going to be talking to y'all as always, and start thinking of hurricane season questions. And it can be anything and everything, because that's what we're going to be focusing on for these shows. And there's going to be 3 of them. One with CMK, one for DPL Plus, and then the other one that we have as well for Generex. So does that make sense? Okay. So again, we're not talking current weather. We're talking hurricane season, general hurricane topics, preps. A lot of people are asking about, will the changes in staffing and satellites have an impact as well? So I'm going to try to knock out 3 of these, one for each show. That's 24 times 3. So that's over an hour of programming. And Pamela's like, yeah, we should just talk about heat lightning. And that's a good point, because that is also generic enough that I could talk about heat lightning for an hour and a half. In fact, you know what? We are going to talk about heat lightning at some point as well. So ask that question again, Pamela. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. All right. And I'm going to start the countdown. I'm going to start it at 7:22. So that means I need to be out at 7:28 for my first hit. 7:28 is my first out time. So when we get close to 7:28, you guys remind me, because you know me, I might start going in whatever direction I go. So we're at 21:05 right now. So I'm going to, I'll start with the open. It's an 18-second open, and then we will get going. All right. So you guys can help me on this. Saying hi from Trinidad. How you doing, Jamil? Good to see you. You have a hurricane icon or avatar, so clearly you are definitely a. Oh yeah. See, Lee's treats are. Yeah, these are good questions. These are good questions. They're really good questions. All right. So here we go. I'm going to take a graphic, and then we're going to jump in about 20 seconds. So hang in there.
Streaming from the ABC Action Weather Center in Studio A, this is Dennis Phillips Live. Brought to you by CMK Construction, crafting Tampa's most exquisite bathrooms and kitchens.
How you doing, everybody? ABC Action News Chief Meteorologist Dennis Phillips here, and we are talking tropics tonight. We're going to talk about preps. We're going to talk about answering your questions. We're going to obviously, I think so many of us went through a lot of rough times with Helene and with Milton. And, you know, I'm always curious what your takes are when it came to those storms. You know, was the information that you were looking for helpful? Did you get the information in a timely fashion? I mean, the only way that we are going to improve on coverage and improve on giving y'all what you need, which is why we're here to keep you safe, is through these kind of conversations. So how you doing? John in Orlando, good to see you. As we have Natalie from Halifax, Nova Scotia. How you doing? And we have Jean from Trinity. So yeah, we got lots of folks here. And this show, and we've talked about this so many times, this show started way before Facebook went live. We had a bunch of us, about 200 of us weather fans, weather geeks, and we just kind of hung out every evening virtually like this and started talking about different things. It was a really tight-knit group. I call them our OGers, right? And then we started going on streaming, expanded our coverage a little bit, and then we went on the spot Tampa Bay 66. And that really changed everything in a lot of ways because, you know, obviously there were more eyeballs watching, which is an awesome thing to get information out there, but it's also maybe not, because sometimes those eyeballs are your bosses, you know, and what we used to be able to get away with, maybe now not so much, because everybody's watching. And, It falls under the category maybe too many chefs in the kitchen, too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't know. But my goal on these shows at this point is to try to find out what it is that you're actually feeling as though that you need, and how can we get that to you, and in what platform? You know, are you getting, I saw a story a couple of days ago that 50% of people out there are getting their news from social media. I don't know where this study originated from, but I noticed it, and it was on my Facebook feed. Shocker. 48% was local news, local television broadcast news. 40% was streaming. So this number, whether it's accurate or not, I can't attest to that, but it was on my Facebook page, so it must be right? Eye roll, tongue in cheek. But the point is, I know this for a fact, and I've said this so many times, because 10 years ago, when people would walk up to me, and even without suspenders, I get recognized a good bit, and people would come up to me and they're like, hey, I watch you on TV. And in the last several years, you get a large number of people say, hey, I follow you on Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok. So the way that y'all are consuming your news is changing, or at least expanding, right? And maybe that's even a better, accurate way of describing it, because it isn't just local TV news, and it used to be. I mean, when I was a kid back in the dinosaur days, you know, we had 3 networks. There was no Fox. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. And you had a local news at 6 and 11, and that's it. And I didn't watch that because I was watching Spider-Man on Channel 20 on my TV in my room. But I know that that's what they had, right? And then cable came along, and we started to get more channels. And now we've gone from more channels to streaming to social. So there's so many more ways for you to consume news and to get news. And I always tell that to people because, you know, there's some people who say, oh, you know, yeah, Jay's like, what's cable? Exactly. You know, some people are cutting the cord on cable. Some are. You know, some are going back to OTA, over the air, and antennas. You know, back in the day, we had rabbit ears on top of your TV for your antenna, or you had a big TV or an antenna on the top of your house, and that's how you got your channels. And then when cable came, it was amazing because you got all these channels. I mean, I loved it, right? And then the expenses and the costs and everything started changing, and people started reevaluating the best way to get what they wanted. And then there were satellite dishes, you know, DirecTV, Dish, and, you know, and then Hulu. Well, even before that, you know, there were streaming channels. You know, then you have Roku, and you have Hulu, and you got all these other platforms where you can consume what you want to consume. But my take is, I believe in my heart of hearts, I truly do. There's always people, oh, well, local news, they're not going to have local news anymore. I disagree vehemently, because people are always going to want to know what's happening in their neighborhood, what's going on in their community, what are the local schools doing, what is happening in terms of safety in my area. Now, the question is, in what platform are they going to watch that? And I think it's going to be multiple platforms. So when we come back, we're going to talk, answering your questions on this platform, and talk about what we learned with this last hurricane season. Okay, so that is one segment down. Segment 1, check. Now, this next segment is also a 2-minute segment, a 6-minute segment. So I will go in at 29, so that means I will be out at 7:35. 7:35. See what we're doing here? Yeah, so it's not a commercial, because we're not, if you're just tuning in, this is not a DPL on TV. This is a DPL that we're having as a backup in case I hit a button down here accidentally and turn off the computer, which could happen. So we want to have an emergency. We want to have some stuff in the can, if you will. So if something happens, or we take a lightning hit or whatever, and the show will continue to run on broadcast. All right, second segment starting in 5 seconds. All right. How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Dennis Phillips Live. Tonight, we're just kind of talking, we're kind of reminiscing a little bit. Someone just said, Dennis, you should say back in the day. Well, yes, It was Jamil from Trinidad, actually watching from Trinidad right now. Saying, back in the day, I mean, that is a thing for me. I've been doing this 39 years. I have been on TV. How the heck did that happen? Everybody's like, yeah, how is he on TV that long? 39 years. It's crazy. I've been in Tampa for 30, almost 31. And prior to that, I was in Salisbury, Maryland, and Gainesville, and Los Angeles, and had a chance to jump into Tampa, and I've loved it. It is home. But after last year, we had quite a season. We all know that. And looking here at the updates here, I mean, we all know from Helene and Milton, we got pretty much everything with those storms. I mean, didn't we? Think about it. Helene was all surge. There really wasn't any wind for us because that storm was over 100 miles offshore. And that's the thing that I think so many people fail to comprehend or understand or accept, maybe is a better word. We got a massive storm surge, the biggest surge we've had since 1921, from a storm that was over 100 miles offshore. Think of that. Now imagine if that had made landfall directly in our area. You'd be talking a 12 to 14 foot surge. So when we're talking, let's go ahead and look at some of these numbers for you here. And I'll keep looking at your questions here because you got lots and lots of comments and questions as always. Here is what NOAA was forecasting. The average is 14.4 named storms. You know what's interesting? When I first started here 20, 30 years ago, that average was 10.7. Because all that average means is the average number of storms that have formed in the last 10 years. So right there, that shows you the 10-year period from 1994 to 2004, it was 10.7. Now, the 10-year period from 2015 to 2025, it's 14.4. So on average, we have had so many more, 40% more, almost 40% more named storms develop in the last 10 years than we did 30 years ago. So, you know, here, look, somebody just asked a good question. Rosemary, you know, this is a great question and a very simple one. Why was the surge so high with Helene? And that is a very reasonable question. And the point of the matter is, the larger the storm, the more water it usually will push. The smaller the storm, because all surge is just a push of water. That storm is literally pushing as it is moving forward. That's all it is. Now, if a storm, let's say a storm comes in from the Caribbean and goes over Cuba and then reemerges north of Cuba and goes to Florida, that storm has to redevelop its surge. Because the push of water, and it also weakens over a 24-hour period of landfall, it's going to weaken somewhat, get more disorganized, more likely than not. So it has to redevelop itself, and it usually takes about 24 hours to do so. So as a storm, if a storm moves into our area, misses Cuba to the west, misses the Yucatan to the east, goes straight up, those are the kind of storms that are our worst case scenario, bumps into a trough, and then hooks into Florida. And in the next segment, I'll give you some specific numbers on that. But the bottom line is, the surge is merely just a area of low pressure pushing water forward and building it as it does so. And Renee is saying she's still recovering from Milton. You know, and Milton was a storm that we did not get surge in most of our area because it made landfall south. It made landfall in Siesta Key. And I realize there are some people watching down Siesta Key, and they got some surge with it. Our worst case scenario, your worst case scenario, wherever it is you live, is a storm that makes landfall about 15 to 20 miles north of where you are. Because, as we saw with Milton, if the storm makes landfall south of us, the flow is still offshore, counterclockwise circulation, pushes all the weather to the west, into the Gulf, pushes. It's called a reverse surge. But if a storm makes landfall north of you, you get an onshore flow, and that pushes water, funnels it right into your area. So for the Tampa Bay area, a landfall of around Newport Richey is probably around worst case scenario. Newport Richey, Bayonet Point, Hudson, those areas of a landfall with an onshore flow. If Helene had made landfall in those areas, we would have had a 12 to 14 foot surge as opposed to a 7-foot surge. It would have been twice as high as it was. So when we come back, we're going to specifically talk month to month about the threats and how they obviously are highest in the early fall months. That's as DPL continues. Okay, so that is segment 2. Check. Segment 3 is 5:45. If you're just tuning in, we're recording these. We're doing this, it's not a broadcast today. And by the way, we apparently have not been on broadcast on, I won't even get into it because we had this conversation on Friday, and literally we were on DPL for 2 hours. We did a 2-hour DPL, and much of it was trying to figure out what was showing on Frontier from 7:30 to 8 o'clock. Was it Magnum PI? Was it the reboot? Was it Friends? Was it nothing? And we never got a definitive answer. So tomorrow night at 7:30, whoever watches on Frontier, you better look and see exactly what's on there and take a screenshot and let me see what is showing, because we're trying to figure out why DPL we thought would be running on Frontier. It wasn't. It was on Spectrum because I recorded it and I saw it. And I have it right on my TV over here, but it was not on Frontier. Okay, so next hit is 5:45. So I'm going to come in at 37:15. So 37:15 means my out time would be what? So it's 37:15 and 5:45 is 53, or 43 rather. No, 40, yeah, 43. Okay, so at 7:43 is my next out, in at 37:15. 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. Yeah, 43. 7:43 out time. You know what, Laura? You may be right. Billy's like, Billy, that's a funny comment. I'm not going to repeat it, but it's funny. James, how you doing, my friend? Okay, so hold on. We got to take the next map here. We're on in 8 seconds. Okay. 3, 2. How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Dennis Phillips Live. We are talking tropics tonight, answering your questions. The questions are, as you would expect, all over the place. And Bobby just brought up a great point. Surge is not an issue for us in northeast Hillsborough County. I worry about the wind. And that is a great point. And that's why we had such a crazy hurricane season last year, because Milton did not bring a surge, but it brought us wind, and it brought us very heavy rains. So we got flooding from surge with Helene, but we got flooding with rainfall with Milton. And then you got the wind with Milton. And that's another great point, Bobby, because that is why, how you doing, Sandy? Because that, Pamela says, I can't do base 60. She's doing some math stuff. Anyway, so that is why I think it's really important to remember when people are evacuating from the coast, you don't have to go 6 hours inland. You don't have to go to Atlanta. You don't have to go to Gainesville. If you're hiding from the wind and running from the water, you can very easily go 10 miles inland to get away from the water. And this is if you live in a flood zone on the coast. It's so important that you guys know what your threats are where you live. If you live on the coast and you flooded with Helene, you know what your threat is. Your threat is everything. It's water, it's wind, it's surge, it's rainfall, it's all of it, right? But if you live in New Tampa or you live in Wesley Chapel, you have two threats. You have the threat of wind and you have the threat of flooding, freshwater flooding, but you don't have the threat of surge. Now, I will be totally honest with you guys. There is nobody on the face of the earth who knows in advance if a particular area is going to flood from rainfall in advance. We don't, because we don't know where that extreme heavy rain will set up and train over a certain area. We just don't know. Now, we'll be able to see it, when it's happening. But if we knew you were going to get 2 feet of rain, right, and you know how Florida is, you'll get it in a specific spot. And it might be 15 miles. And then you go another 10 miles north and you get an inch or 2 of rain. Nobody knows where that is going to set up. So what will happen is there will be a flood watch issued first, and it'll cover the whole area. It'll cover everybody, right? So unfortunately, for the people who are flooded by rainfall, you're just not going to be able to prepare for it in terms of knowing whether to evacuate or not. And there were some people who flooded out with rainfall, and they would have evacuated if they knew, and you never will. Now, maybe you would know 2 hours in advance, but at that point, it might be too late to leave anyway. So unfortunately, we are just not good enough to know exactly where that line will set up. I mean, if everybody's going to get 2 feet of rain, okay, then maybe you say everybody evacuates, but that's not the way it works in Florida. You guys know it. There's smaller areas, thin ribbon areas that get pounded with heavy rain, and a lot of other people don't. So evacuating for rainfall flooding is almost impossible. Evacuating for surge is absolutely possible. And the models did a stellar job with predicting that surge with Helene. Nobody wanted to believe it. I mean, let's be honest. Who wanted to believe, or who would believe, that a storm that was over 100 miles offshore would give us a 7 or an 8 foot surge? Who would believe that? Most Floridians are skeptical about the forecast anyway. We are. I get it. I've seen too many times where the models are saying something and it's completely wrong. But I believe after this last year, people will probably pay closer attention if you live on the coast, if there is a forecast of a surge 7 or 8 feet, even if the storm is going to be 100 miles offshore. So now Jonathan brings up an interesting point. Sarasota has flood zones when it just rains on normal heavy days due to the overamount of pavings on overflow zones, so the water gets trapped. Thanks for the update, Nancy. So there are, yes, you know what? Great point. There are some people, some areas where the people know are more likely. Shore Acres. Shore Acres is a perfect example. And you know what you're looking at right here when you see these categories of hurricanes. Look, if you're talking about a Cat 4 or a Cat 5, it's all hands on deck. Most people are going to be evacuating anyway. But if you're talking about a 1 or a 2 and you're on the coast, you're maybe in a gray area whether you think you need to evacuate. You want to follow the emergency operation folks. When they say to evacuate, you evacuate. But at the end of the day, again, it all depends on what your level of threat is. And as we get into the fall, I suspect we're going to be dealing with a lot of this again. And we're going to talk about that month-by-month part coming up in just another minute. Okay, so let's advance to this map. Okay, you guys have seen this map. That was segment 3. Check. How many segments does this show have? Do I have to do one more segment? I've done 6. I'm on my last segment. Holy cow. I am on my last segment, right? Yes. Jonathan, yes. Jonathan loves to be here on a Sunday evening. You can hear it in his voice. Yes. Okay. 5:45. So let's see. If I go in at 40, I'll go at 44:15, and that'll put me right at 7:50. Right? Right. right? Right, 750. All right, 750 out. Coming up. In. 3, 2. How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Dennis Phillips Live. We're going to talk about month-by-month tropical threat because, as we said, we hide from the wind, we run from the water. If you live along the coast, 10 miles might be plenty inland to get away if you're talking about a Cat 1 or a Cat 2 hurricane or a surge of maybe 6 or 7 feet. You're away from the threat. You hide from the water. No, you run from the water. You hide from the wind. But if you're talking about a Cat 3 or a 4 or a 5, and you're in an area where you're concerned about extreme winds, at that point, you need to get out of Dodge. And hopefully that's something that we can give you forecast-wise well in advance. So I want to show you, these are the month-by-month forecasts. And, July and even August, while August does pick up dramatically, the majority of the storms, and when you look at that red color, 70 plus, are staying out way in the Atlantic. And I want to show you something, and I talk about this a lot. Look at the tracks of where the majority of the landfall, or the majority of the tracks of these hurricanes are. They stay offshore. And I find this really important because even though August looks to be a pretty active month, the majority of the time, August is not our biggest month. It would be September. And when you see September, that is when everything opens up. Now, in Florida, think about Andrew, think about Charlie. Those are August storms. But the concern about September and October are simply because, well, first of all, two things. One, look at the red color. The majority of hurricanes and named storms that form in the Atlantic, look where they go. They stay offshore. They do not hit anybody. They're fish storms. The majority of storms that form stay offshore. And even the secondary development, the orange, 50 to 69 named storms in the last 100 years, the majority of them stay offshore. Not all, they're right along the coast from Georgia, through the Outer Banks of the Carolinas. But the majority of these storms still stay offshore. So just because a storm forms and people are tracking it and we're talking about it does not mean it's an imminent landfall. And that is so important. So in the month of September, and I've told you this a million times, our biggest concern is a track of a storm that comes in from the south. If it misses Cuba to the west, if it misses the Yucatan to the east, it is going to be drawn northward. More often than not, it's drawn northward in September. But look at where you get a little bit of a bump to the west, where the majority of the landfalls occur from a storm coming in September. It's the Panhandle to New Orleans, more of a northerly track. So why in the world don't you see these storms coming up and hooking to the right? Well, because for you to have that, you would need a front to come down. How many fronts do we get in early September? Not a lot. Front will stay right there. It will drive a storm to the east into Florida. In September, you start to see those fronts come in. In August, you rarely see those fronts come in. In October, you see them all the time. So you can make the argument, and this is my point as you look at this, you can make the argument that as we start to see more storms developing, we'd already talked about earlier on in this show that in the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, we averaged 10.7 named storms. Now we average 14.4 named storms. There are more storms happening. Does that mean that trend's going to continue? I don't know. Who knows? That's long-range stuff, and I don't put a lot of weight in those long-range forecasts. But the point is, as we are now seeing more September and October and even early November storms, there is a greater risk to the west coast of Florida in those months, because at that point, you have fronts coming down, you have troughs digging in, which would curve a storm to the east. So our greatest threats by far would be a storm later in the season, September, October, and even into early November. So again, let's recap. Hide from the wind, run from the water. Hurricane season really gets cranking the end of August and sticks around through the end of October. And as always, follow the National Hurricane Center, their guidance, follow us. We will be there for you 24/7. Our entire team, Greg, Allie, Shay, and Jason are here for you 24/7 during hurricane season. You have a great night, and we'll see you on our next edition of Dennis Phillips Live. One show down. So that is one show down. Now, I have to switch this graphic, and I don't know if that's going to cut off Facebook, but we will see. And we're going to talk more. We're going to talk about some other things. So here's what I'm going to do. If this cuts the stream, don't cross the streams. If this cuts the stream, I will create a new stream and we'll do this again for the next show, which, Jonathan, you switched already. All right, so good. So we're with the next one. And we'll do this again. And I'll keep asking your questions and keep pointing out your questions, because I love that this is helpful to me. Your time cues are helpful as well. And so let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and just see if I just open up a new window. I'm going to see if it works. If it doesn't, I will open up a new stream in just a minute, and you can find it on Facebook. All right? If it does work, it'd be cool. Let's try it.